Hello everyone, this is Caitlin Barlow, and for my final Tableau project, I decided to pose the research question: do states that have the most renewable energy and efficiency incentives also utilize renewable energy sources the most in comparison to other energy sources? The types of energy sources that the U.S. Energy Information Administration considers renewables are wind, solar, hydroelectric, geothermal, wind and biomass waste, biodiesel, energy losses from biofuel production, and fuel ethanol. I'm going to show you the websites where I got my data from real quick. This is Desire, or the DSIRE website, database of state incentives for renewable and efficiency. If you hover over state, it lets you know exactly how many policies and incentives there are. If you click on it, it gives you a more detailed breakdown and lets you know whether it is an incentive, a policy, or a program. I used this information and transitioned it into an Excel workbook. And then I added this data that I got from the EIA website. This is another website where if you click on the state, it gives you a more detailed breakdown. This gives you end-use energy consumption from 2018 in 3 different categories for each state. So I transitioned those into the Excel workbook as well. And then I brought that workbook from Excel into Tableau. I already did that just to save time. Now we can begin working on our first sheet. So I'm going to rename this first sheet. I'm going to call it number of policies by state. And then we are going to use this desired data. Just drag and drop state and drag and drop number of policies right into that middle frame. I'm then going to use the show me menu to pick the packed bubbles graph. I'm going to drag state onto color to differentiate the bubbles by color, and the number of policies on the label to let us know what number of policies and incentives each state has. Now, as you can see, some of the larger circles that indicate more policies and programs for businesses, electric companies, and individuals within a state to use renewable energy sources. The ones with the most are Minnesota, California, Oregon, Colorado, New York, Washington, and Texas. We'll just keep that in mind moving forward. Moving along to sheet number 2, this is where we're going to actually start comparing some of this data that was on the EIA website and on the Desire website. Now we are going to rename this one policy and incentive to renewables by state comparison. Now for this, we are going to start working with the end use consumption by source table. We're going to drag state to columns, value to columns. This gives the percentage of what percentage of energy source each state uses. As you can see, it's one. We need to use the energy source that we want to filter. So I'm going to drag energy source and filter it to only renewable energy because that's what we're interested in learning. Now we're going to do the same thing for the electric power sector consumption by source, state to columns, value to rows, and then we are going to filter by energy source, renewable energy, and the same for the desired data, state to column, but this time number of policies and incentive to rows, and that one's going to be down at the bottom. Now we're going to drag state to color to make it easier to read and use our fit pane. Clicking entire window will bring everything into view. This is where we can actually start seeing some of these things. Going into this, I would have assumed that states with the most policies, incentives, and programs would naturally have the highest percentage of renewable energy sources, considering there were so many incentives for them to do so. However, as we can see here, this is not really the case. The states we mentioned in the previous sheet are down here. You can see they're spiking, which is the same as the larger circles from the first sheet. California, Minnesota, Texas, New York, Colorado, Washington, all of those have these high bars up here. But if you look at the two charts above it, you can see that the states that have the largest usage percentage of renewables aren't exactly those states that we mentioned. Iowa, Idaho, Maine, Nebraska, Vermont, South Dakota. These states are actually the ones that are using the most renewables by state or by percentage, not the major ones that we had seen with the most incentives and programs. So I thought that was interesting. You can see Washington and Oregon are close. They're right below those states I mentioned for having the biggest percentages of renewable usage. So they are closest to being, indicative of what I would have thought. More programs, more renewable energy sources used, but they're definitely not the most. So that's interesting, and we'll keep that in mind moving on to sheet 3. For this one, we are going to just rename it comparison map quickly. And then we are going to use the desired data to auto-populate that map. And now we're actually going to create a calculated field. We're going to call this values total for renewables. And then type in value, percentage. That will give us the percentage for end use consumption by source. And then add value percentage with the electric power sector consumption by source. What this is going to do is it's going to combine those two percentages just to kind of give us a more an easier number to see. Instead of having like two separate graphs like we did in the previous sheet, this is going to give us one number combining those percentages. And we are actually going to drag that over onto our map, then drag it to color, change from automatic to map, and now we need to filter again. So we're going to drag energy sources up to filter, filter to renewables, do the same for down here, and use consumption by source, renewable energy. And now we are going to drag the number of policies to label. And we're going to see a lot of what we learned in the last chart as well. I'm going to exclude Hawaii and Alaska just so it's easier to see. And those numbers are very middle of the road. They don't really, make a big impact on what we're discussing. So I'm going to leave them off for now. As you can see, the states with the darkest hue of blue are the ones that have the largest percentage of renewable energy sources used. And the darkest colors are not the ones with the highest numbers. Those high numbers are the ones that have the most policies and programs. Remember, like California, Texas, New York. But they are not the darkest colors, which again was surprising to me. Again, Oregon and Washington are pretty close, but they are not by any means the darkest, like Idaho and South Dakota. Interestingly enough, Maine is the darkest, and they only have 20 incentive programs and policies. All right, now we are going to quickly make a new dashboard. We click new dashboard. We're going to drag over policy, this 3-graph chart we did. We're going to take that away just so it's easier to see. We're going to spread this out so you can see everything within there, and actually you can read the numbers better on this than you could in the sheet by itself. Then we're going to bring our bubble chart over. And our comparison map. And by doing this, we're going to have everything just in one spot for us to be able to view and look at and, draw conclusions from. And it's, makes it a lot easier to kind of look at and, decide what you think. I think I learned a lot from this, making this floating dashboard was definitely one of the things I learned the most. I also learned not to make consumptions because it definitely, or excuse me, assumptions, because I definitely would have thought that the states with the most policies and incentives were the ones that had the most highest percentage of renewable sources used. So I definitely wasn't right about that. But yeah, here we go.